All right, so Bismillah ar-Rahman ar-Rahim and Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh. And finally, back, everybody. Inshallah, today we're going to be continuing where we left off at, but I think it's been such a while after that blood clot that we really need to kind of go over some of the things that we talked about before we jump into a new series of ayat, right? Let's do that. So we talked about, let's just kind of make a fast review. Inna rabbakum Allahu alladhi khalaqa as-samawati wal ard. And we said that or at least those were the series of ayat that basically laid out a couple of foundations of Tawheed, in the Tawheed in understanding Allah Almighty as one, the creator of matter, two, the creator of what makes matter function. So we're talking about the motion of it, and also the one, which basically is the theme right there, أَلَا لَهُ الْخَلْقُ وَالْأَمْرُ, to let us know that, well, based on the premise that he was the creator, then he is the only one that would have the right to set one direction to the purpose of things, three, the patterns of things, and therefore to make the announcement, Tabarakallahu Rabbul Alameen. And we went in details with the word Tabarak and the word Tabarak and where it comes from, and we went to the root Baraka, and we went into a number of different resources and the etymology of the word Tabarak and so forth. And we said that that announcement to let us know that every single one creature, every single creation, three, every single pattern, every single destination, every single purpose is basically based on the power of the Lord Almighty, and not something that is, let's call it as an intrinsic energy within matter, but it is actually something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that is the sole power, the sole potential, the sole force, the sole basically Lord Almighty that had created everything, and at the same time gives it the ability to function. And therefore, that took us to number two, or the second part about Tawheed, which is the Tawheed of ritual, the Tawheed of worship. So we said the word Ud'u rabbakum tadarru'a wa khufya. You worship the Lord Almighty, or you invoke the Lord Almighty in tadarru', basically in submission to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, in sincerity to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And khufya, is this supposed to be in silence, or is this supposed to be something that we recognize that it is at least in a place of sincerity, in, let's say, an area of sincerity, or in a position of sincerity? At the end of the day, we're speaking about khufya as a higher level of resembling commitment and resembling that sincerity between you and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then we also went into إِنَّهُ لَا يُحِبُّ الْمُعْتَدِينَ, that the Lord Almighty does not like those that transgress the limits. And we talked about il-mu'tadi. So we said il-mu'tadi is one, a person that transgresses the limit. And when we said transgresses the limit, we're talking about the limit that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically set. Whether we're speaking about set in legislation, in the definition of justice, in the definition of morality, ethics, all of that, or whether we were speaking about within the context of that ayah, that would basically entail innahu la yuhibbul mu'tadin, meaning transgression in worship, worshiping other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or invoking other than Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether this is talking about transgressing the limit. And we talked about the 20 different areas, although sometimes I guess some of those points were probably overlapping with one another. But we said in general, making any dua that is one containing shirk, I'm just going to probably put them in 5 points: containing shirk, or probably containing something that is against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had already determined or ordained to be as the default status or the default situation in the world, such as, for example, that shirk is not going to be forgiven, that Jannah and hellfire are always going to be these final destinations, and that no one is going to be somehow excluded from resurrection and so forth. So that therefore just recognizing, so if Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had said something, whether we're speaking about as a default in creation slash reality, or whether we're speaking about things that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically considered and set as a reality in this universe, and that would be al-i'tida' fi du'a. We also talked about al-i'tida' fi du'a, where there's a transgression against people's kin or even a salih person. So we went in details with that one. And then we talked about وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بَعْدَ إِصْلَاحِهَا, and do not cause or inflict. One, we're speaking about oppression, we're speaking about corruption, we're speaking about anything that goes against what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had considered as, one, the definition of justice, the definition of integrity, the definition of piety, the definition of what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set as the limits to what we need to live based on as the definition of ethics and morality, basically in legislature. And we went in some details in regards to that piece of it. And we said that in general, there's a legal maxim. And in the maxim, which is the preservation, we basically put it in an acronym, DNAIM, and we said the D stands for deen, basically religiosity, basically to stay within tawheed, and for nafs, the preservation of health slash life, 3, aql, the preservation of mind, and certainly that would include education, that would include mental health, and the preservation of ird, family or chastity, and certainly they both go together. And finally, the preservation of wealth, whether we're speaking about how income is coming in or how money is used. In other words, we're talking about distribution, or we're probably talking about wealth and how you basically invest your wealth, whether we're speaking about in investment or probably in spending. So that is وَلَا تُفْسِدُوا فِي الْأَرْضِ بعد إصلاحها, and do not cause corruption after Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically set what it means and how we basically were supposed to be living based on the, I guess, one, the pattern, and two, the area of justice that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this world in, which basically is giving us the inference that going against, one, whether we're speaking about nature, meaning your own nature, or whether this is talking about nature as an ecological system, or whether this is talking about a certain paradigm or a certain pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had set, whether we're speaking about social justice or whether we're speaking about economical justice, or we're speaking about all those different patterns that bring about stability, that bring about justice, that bring about basically that tranquility within the society or within the world, etc. All of that is basically to let us know that that's the goal of Sharia. The goal of Sharia is to bring about justice, is to bring about peace, is to bring about islah, is to bring about piety, is to bring about maximizing the good within the society and within the world. وَادْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا, and we also went in details. How do we worship Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or how do we invoke Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in fear and in hope? And we basically went in lots of details in fear and hope, and the most important word that we used, which was Ibn al-Qayyim's word. He said it's kind of like it's kind of like a bird with two wings. and that these two wings are basically to help that bird, let's say, stay stable and balanced within the air as they glide. So one wing is probably flapping to turn a certain direction, or basically to glide in a way that keeps it balanced. So that is the balance of fear of whether the consequence or accountability, or fear of judgment day, etc., or with all the different things that are in it, or even punishment, or fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to oversee us in such an act. And that was the fear. Or probably even fear that our sin might not be forgiven as well. So, and then it-tama would basically be that hope that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give us, that mercy would include us in his mercy, would include us in his blessings, and that would be وَدْعُوهُ خَوْفًا وَطَمَعًا. And we said إِنَّ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ, and we went in details with إِنَّ رَحْمَةَ اللَّهِ قَرِيبٌ مِّنَ الْمُحْسِنِينَ. And we said, Inna rahmatallahi qareebun min al-muhsinin. Is it qareebun? Is it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the one that is near? Or is this talking about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that is near? In the end, whether this is talking about the mercy, whether this is talking about this is talking about the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, or whether this is talking about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala being near, at the end of the day, it's really the same. It's really the same, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is near, and so is his mercy near. And certainly then the following ayah would give me certain details. وَهُوَ الَّذِي يُرْسِلُ الرِّيَاحَ بُشْرًا بَيْنَ يَدَيْ رَحْمَتِهِ, to let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala give us a visual, I guess, a visual relationship, that how do we understand that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is near? How do we understand Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy is near? How do we how do we have that, let's say, that sense of relationship in understanding that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is real, and so is his mercy. So Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gives us an idea, and he says that he is the one to send الرياح بشرا بين يدي رحمته, that he is the one to send wind, basically, whether we're speaking about nushran or whether we're speaking about bushran بين يدي رحمته. We said if we were to use the qira'ah nushran, that would let us know that this is basically something uh, that this is something basically that surrounds us, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets us know that he is surrounding us in ways that we may not recognize, and that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is surrounding us with his mercy, whether letting the wind, as exactly like the wind that would surround us, or whether this is talking about that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy basically giving us this life that would even come to us from beneath our legs, or even from the top of our heads. So what water are you talking about beneath and up above and all of that? So that's why it was letting us know, bushran bayna yaday rahmatih. The wind, you may think, is just a force of oxygen, or a force of just something moving about and all around us. But Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that that force is actually moved not by itself, but is actually moved by the mercy of the Lord Almighty. And the mercy of the Lord Almighty is the one that would let that precipitation basically happen in those clouds, that would carry the huge amounts of water from one area, from one city that would be infertile, to another city, and then certainly the water would be carried, and with this huge amount of water, it would basically pour over that city. And then, without you realizing, all those different fruits, all those different greenery, all that different greenery would basically start blossoming without you realizing that it was actually the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was subtle, the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that was filling the air, that was moving everything all around you and bringing all the blessings from up above you and from underneath you and from around you, and without you even realizing how everything was actually controlled by the Lord Almighty's mercy. How everything was controlled by the Lord Almighty's mercy. And then we talked about the word كذلك, that paradigm that lets us know that the world is all run by the magnificence, by the mercy of the Lord Almighty, comes in the word كذلك to let us know that everything, whether we're speaking about the wind, or whether we're speaking about the resurrection, or whether we're speaking about a baby in his mother's womb, or whether we're speaking about you walking to go to work without you realizing, everything is controlled, everything is planned, everything is basically going with the embracement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power. And then this كذلك comes in to let us know that everything works based on the patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created this universe in. And he said, well, based on the pattern that you had basically seen in how Earth would be at one point probably infertile, and then when rain pours over it, it becomes fertile again. The same method, the same system that brings this land alive with all that greenery. That's the same way that human beings are resurrected on Judgment Day, that they would basically have pouring rain, or at least a substance that is like rain, and then we as human beings would basically grow from the seed, which is basically the tailbone, and then we would grow from that as trees, and then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order Israfil to blow in the horn, and we would come back to life, and from that we basically would head to the destination of basically accountability and Judgment Day. So those are the things we talked about last time. We went in details with Tafseer al-Qurtubi. We talked about, here we go, those different qira'at right there. No need to go over them again, but just to remember some of the things. And I think we left off the word سقناه. No, did we? سقناه لبلد ميت. And let me just go over it. Did we actually go over all of that? Yeah, we did. This is where we left off at. والبلد الطيب يخرج نباته بإذن ربه والذي خبث لا يخرج إلا نكدا كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون. This is where we left off at. Okay, so but wait a minute. We did actually comment on this one. كذلك نخرج الموتى لعلكم تذكرون. And we also didn't go over the words that al-Qurtubi had said. So let's continue from there. So سقناه, and this is talking about, what is it? So here's the word سقناه. Let me just erase all of that, okay? So we can know where we're at, because I know when there's so many different lines, it kind of gets confusing to where and what we're talking about. So, okay, حتى إذا أقلت سحابا. What is أقلت? What are we talking about? So أقلت, this is talking about the wind. Okay, what is it carrying? Well, then in that situation, in this context, it's basically dealing with the clouds as if they're nothing but a machine basically set to do one particular purpose, which is this machine to carry the water. And this machine is basically created that way to function in just doing one thing, collecting water and releasing it. That's basically what it is. So when you say سقناه, the word سقناه, I want you to look at this word, because the word سقناه actually means that it was driven, okay? That it was driven. And that's to let us know that whether you're looking at clouds or whether you're looking at people resurrected on Judgment Day, or whether you're seeing, remember how we connected these ayat, these group of ayat, with the ayat in Surah Al-Shura, جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا ومن الأنعام أزواجا يذرأكم فيه ليس كمثله شيء والسميع البصير. And we also talked about له مقاليد السماوات والأرض, etc. We talked about the connection between these set of ayat and the set of ayat in Surah Al-Shura when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us فاطر السماوات والأرض جعل لكم من أنفسكم أزواجا. We said it basically let us know two sides of it. One, it's talking about how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created matter, and then with له مقاليد السماوات والأرض, how he also set the function of things. So we're talking about the matter and emotion, and that both were actually created by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, letting us know that whether we're speaking about the creation of matter or whether we're speaking about the creation of the system in what makes matter function in, that it's all controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that it's not some intrinsic energy within matter to make it function, but is actually controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that the system itself runs by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's what you would basically understand from the inference of the word suqnahu. How did we get there? So the word suqnahu, if I were to translate the word in English, it would mean, it is driven. Okay, it is driven. Okay, so when you say it is driven, certainly this is basically right there, a passive voice, but it's basically we had driven it. This is actually more accurate. We had driven it. Okay, so when you say driven it, what do you mean by driving something? When you say suqn, so in other words, siyaqa, or to basically drive something, that would actually mean that there is a certain force that determines where everything is set to take off, or what is basically determining and giving it the power to move. That it's actually coming from, I want you to look at that na right there, and this na is a pronoun, which basically means we. But this we, how is it? I thought Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. Yes, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. But in Lugha Arabiya, with a plural pronoun, that is not to mean that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is plural. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is one. But this plural form in Lugha Arabiya can also carry with it the meaning of nobility, the meaning of honor, the meaning of magnificence. Okay, so when you look at سُقْنَاهُ لِبَلَدٍ مَيِّتٍ, the inference is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the force that basically controls everything from the things that are up above you to the things that basically are underneath you, that every single force that you would see in matter, that is not an intrinsic force on its own, but that's power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put within it. Okay, but one thing to say, you might say, well, I mean, if I were to do an ACL and probably add maybe, something onto it, that the rule, and depending on the amount of probably another element that we put in there, it's going to basically come out to giving us the same result. Okay, we're going to say definitely. We're going to get Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically created this world in two sets of patterns. There's a set of pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created that basically functions with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's will, and he basically had set how that pattern functions. Okay, so it's not that when you probably put water in it in that NaCl, and you probably, the sodium and the chlorine, you probably, with adding water onto it, that H2O, you probably gave it a new solution or whatever it is, and then all of that, and then you say, okay, well, now I basically had determined what this goes and what happens to the NaCl, and that H2O basically dissolved it and all of that stuff. We're going to say, wait a minute, you were given the ability to basically add that water. Now you had that free will to add it, but Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that determined how things function. And that's one thing to help us understand qada or qadar. Qada'u qadar is that there are certain things in this universe that do not have free will. And there are other things in this universe, just like you and I, we basically would have free will in order to choose to do something or not do something. So when you talk about things that do not have free will, that does not mean that it is basically functioning on its own because it doesn't even have any will. The NaCl cannot one day just decide, you know what, today I don't feel like bonding with this H2O. I'm going to do something else today and just decide to do something else. There's no way, unless there is a different chemical reason. If we probably heated the water or probably maybe got it cold or whatever it is, then that's a different reason to why we basically did not have the same result. Okay, but when we look at free will, that is number one, to let us know that there are certain things that do not have free will, and that's actually controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And the things that do have free will, that doesn't mean that it's not controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but it just means that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given it limited time for the reason of accountability, for the reason that it is being tested. That's the only reason why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had given you free will to choose to go to, I don't know, the masjid, or choose to go to maybe not the masjid. Okay, then within that area, that's the area of testing. That's the area of testing. That's where Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will hold us accountable, but will not hold it accountable, for example, the NaCl, or probably the trees or the mountains. Those are not held accountable. Why? Because they were not given free will, but you were. Okay, remember that ayah when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given that amana on the skies and the mountains and all of that, but then they refused to carry it, but human beings carried it. إِنَّهُ كَانَ ظَلُومًا جَهُولًا. And that's basically, all right, and that's to basically let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically had given us free will for that accountability, and just to help us understand when we speak about free will, when we speak about the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in the universe and how we understand it. So when you look at the word suqnahu, what is the pronoun referring to? That ha right there, what is it referring to? In Lugha Arabiya, there's a default ruling. What is it? It's the pronoun that you would have basically goes to the nearest noun. So this hat right there is going to go to the nearest noun, and the nearest noun is basically the cloud. This is referring to the clouds right there, and certainly this is talking, that's why he said as-sahab li baladin mayyit. But one thing I want to look at here, that sometimes in Lugha Arabiya, and this is very common in the Quran, that that the ayat might say that we asked was'al al-qarya, ask al-qarya, or ask the city. Do you actually go and, stand probably on a high hill and say, hey, I've got a question for you? No, you don't actually do it this way. So when sometimes the ayat might say was'al al-qarya and ask the city, it doesn't necessarily ask you to literally ask the city. It means the people that are in the city. And that's the same thing when it says li baladin mayyit. This isn't giving us the inference that the city is dead, but this is actually letting us know that whether we're speaking about a city itself and what it contains, whether one, what it contains is that there's probably no plants, no vegetation. So that basically means that that area is basically with no crops, nothing to keep it alive. And therefore, when you look at living areas, you're speaking about an area that basically is full of life, whether we're speaking about trees, or whether we're speaking about all these different living creatures that are within that at least land, and that basically means that that area is alive. Okay, that means that that area is like, there is something rather interesting when Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala actually had said that the earth itself moves. The earth itself moves, and we're not talking about the rotation of earth. No, we're speaking about the earth basically absorbing water, and that it basically does a certain motion of, kind of like a pulse. Okay, kind of like a pulse. And we would see, that حتى إذا أنزلنا عليه الماء اهتزت وربت. اهتزت, the word is that it would basically go in some motion of ihtizaz, kind of like movement or pulse, that it would be there. So when you look at that, you see that in fact, another ayah that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in Surah Al-Dukhan, that Allah, فَمَا بَكَتْ عَلَيْهِمُ السَّمَاء, and not the earth and not the skies basically teared over them. You start looking at it like the sun, the skies, and the earth tear, they cry over people. What does that even mean? And can they also be joyful of a presence of somebody on them? Like if you are praying, let's say, or making a retreat, probably in a certain area, do the trees, does the earth feel your presence? The answer is yes. That is another inference. That the trees, that the earth, that the sky recognizes your presence, even though you may not think of the tree but something that is matter, something that is of no intelligence, but you can see that the hadith at least are letting us know that the trees do recognize who's walking underneath it. The Just like in the hadith when the that tree recognized that the Prophet ﷺ basically moved from one location and it started giving a moaning sound. And then that's when the Sahaba all noticed that the tree was actually giving a moaning sound because the Prophet ﷺ wasn't standing next to it any longer. And then the Prophet ﷺ basically stood next to it and then put his hand over it, and it basically went into a state of sukoon because it was happy. And of course, you could say that a lot of times, for vegetarians, they would say, well, animals, we're not supposed to be eating animals because we're harming animals, etc. But in Islam, even trees and even plants have feelings. Okay. So if they think that they're being so affectionate, they're being so merciful on animals, we're actually going to say we're actually beyond that in our affection, because we actually regard that even plants and even the earth that you walk on has emotions and has feelings, and actually is something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala let us know that we have to live in being merciful onto, whether we're speaking about the plants or whether we're speaking about animals or whether even speaking about earth, that all of that deserves that we treat it with affection. Okay, let's continue right there. The word al-balad, just like when we said earlier that al-balad can give the inference that this is talking about the city itself, but this is talking about all the different things that the city is composed of. So whether we're speaking about plants or whether we're speaking about creatures, all of that is what the city is composed of. But I thought it would be a good idea to at least give you some hint to the most important meanings, the most important, I guess, kind of like a vocabulary, and help you see just by looking at the word balad that in Lugha Arabiya, one word can actually give so many different meanings. Just one word can have so many different meanings, and then the scholars will look into the meanings, and based on the context or based on, of course, the hadith will tell you, well, this is the chosen meaning. Let's give an idea with al-balad. So the first meaning is that al-balad basically means every single area of land, whether that was an area of land that did have construction slash civilization or not, whether this area or this city had people dwelling and living there or not, at the end it would be called balad. The second meaning of al-balad is basically to mean the area that leaves a trail behind. This one's quite interesting. You're talking about a trail, leaving a trail. So a trail of what? We're speaking about a trail, whether a trail, a trace of that there were people dwelling here, that this is also bad. So you're talking about the Aztecs, for example, that one point there was a civilization that lived here and that these people left behind, whether it's pottery or probably left behind maybe the different things that they used to grind, or probably the tools that they used to live and dwell here, all of that, that's also another meaning for balad. Let's see another one. This one's quite interesting. It basically means an ostrich's egg, the ostrich, but not any type of any type of an egg that is left for basically for an ostrich, or what that an ostrich would have, but it's the egg that the ostrich chooses to leave behind. This one's quite interesting. That the egg, okay, no, that the egg that the ostrich chose to leave behind. So I'm not sure how and how this ostrich would recognize that this is a bad egg or this is a good egg that it probably chooses to, I don't know, sit on. Do they sit on it like chickens? I have no idea. I absolutely have no idea about ostrich world. So yeah, tell me about it. But this is, where do they get that from? I mean, how did you get from city to an egg that an ostrich chooses to leave behind? It's quite interesting. But you just want to keep in mind that in Lugha Arabiya, uh, البيضة, just the word bayda, which actually means egg, but البيضة also is another word that in the books of Siyas al-Sharia. What does that mean? We're talking about Islamic politics, that they would use the word egg or bayda to actually mean city. So, or حماية البيضة to mean nation as well. So when you look at حماية البيضة, this isn't talking about, I don't know, we're keeping some eggs in a warm place to make sure that they hatch better. No, this is talking about this is talking about the Muslim nation basically be getting protected, and that it is basically the responsibility of those in power to make sure that the nation is having, one, the security, the resources that they need, and certainly all the different necessary things to keep the society basically intact, just like an egg. Okay, so when you look at the books of Siyas al-Sharia, whether al-Mawardi or al-Farra, or the list goes on, Ibn Sahnun, that they would actually talk about this himayat al-bayda and the protection of al-bayda, but this isn't talking about any egg. This is talking about the nation of Islam, not the nation of Islam as in Louis Farhan. No, this is talking about the nation, the Muslim nation, the Ummah. Okay, so just to keep that one in mind, and how we, just connect these simple dots together sometimes, and how we can use a certain metaphor and a certain word that is a certain, basically a certain meaning, in a literal meaning, and how sometimes you can see those correlations. Let's see al-balda, and he said that it is basically a position, or at least manazil al-qamar. What do you mean manazil al-qamar? Of course, the moon has certain cycles, moon has certain cycles, and every single cycle, of course, we know moon starts out in a crescent shape and it keeps on growing up by the seventh day. Maybe we can give you a little fast thing. So this is the crescent, and then on the seventh day, it would be half a moon. So that would be the seventh day. Well, seventh, sixth day depends on how fast that noon is. And then by the time it is a full moon, it is either the 13th, the 14th, or the 15th. And it goes smaller and smaller, and then it becomes half a moon, and that's basically on the 23rd day. I want you to realize this half a moon compared to this half a moon. So on the second cycle of the half a moon, that's the 23rd. And then finally, it keeps getting smaller and smaller until you see it as a crescent again. And then it starts a new cycle. So when you look at that al-Balda part of it, Manazil al-Qamar, this is talking about these cycles. Okay. These cycles, and certainly this is also called, Balda as well. Let's see another Balda. We're talking about right there as the chest. Are we talking about like a literal chest, or what are we talking about? So we're speaking about metaphorically, not a chest meaning, the area where you would have your ribs and all of that. No, no, this isn't talking about that. Wasi' sadr is a metaphor or an idiom to properly say it. It's an idiom to mean that a person is, I guess, patient. A person is easygoing. A person that is compromising. That's a person that is a compromising person. That's wasi' sadr. Okay, so this is an idiom to also mean person that is willing to compromise, willing to be, of course, literally it means a person with a wide chest, but this is not to be understood as a literal translation, but this is an idiom to basically give us a description of somebody that is compromising and easygoing. And the other part, let's see, look at this one's quite interesting, very interesting. A bulda or a balda is basically when a person has space between their two eyebrows. Some people, they have a unibrow. No, a person that doesn't have a unibrow is basically called a balda. They don't have anything in between their brows. Okay, that's that balda right there. Okay, now I made it into a unibrow, but imagine, yeah, okay, maybe we can make it into that. So there we go. Now between these two, oh man, I erased the whole brow. Oh no, this is nums right there. Okay, now there we go. This is balda right there. It's basically that empty space between the two brows. This one's quite interesting. Okay, now let's jump on to the following ayat. فأنزلنا به الماء. Okay, wait a minute. So what did you want to say from all of this? I just wanted you, with all these meanings of al-balad and al-balda and all of that, I wanted you to see how one word in Lugha Arabiya can actually have multiple meanings that may not even have any correlation with one another, and that this, whether we're speaking about a metaphorical meaning, or whether this is talk or metaphorical, where is this one, that this is the metaphorical meaning, or whether this is talking about a literal meaning, or whether this is talking about a certain description for a particular noun. And that's why in Lugha Arabiya you would say, for example, Ibn Manzur in his book Lisan al-Arab, you would see he would take one word, and then this word he'll lay out all these different meanings. And sometimes there's no connection. But Ibn Faris, on the other hand, Ibn al-Faris, he basically did that fiqh al-lugha. And with fiqh al-lugha, he'll basically connect these ties. He's, this great scholar. I don't know how he, came up with this a genius way of finding the algorithms. I would say, maybe we could say it that way, especially in the age of AI, but he would connect these these meanings, and he would connect these words, whether we're speaking about the literal meaning, or whether this is talking about an idiom, or whether this is talking about um, uh, you know, a figurative way, and then he'll connect these in order to help you understand the correlation between these words. How did the Arab use that meaning in that sense to give such a meaning? All right, just wanted you to see that one. Okay, فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاءَ, and we had sent down. When you look at the word anzalna, what does that remind you of? Anzalna in the words of the Quran, that they were always basically described as nuzul. When you say the word nazala, that is to give us the inference that something is basically sent from up to down. And when you say something sent from up to bottom, basically, you're giving one, the meaning that that something is at a higher level, and that it basically it reaches down, and therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let us know that whether we're speaking about the different matter that is controlled, or whether this is talking about the different dimensions and that they're controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So different dimension, whether we're speaking about dimension of up and down, or whether we're speaking about dimensions of how things basically would move from east to west, basically in wind. And that's to let us know that all the different things that are controlled, the way things are driven, whether east, west, or whether up, down, all of that is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and not that matter itself is just functioning on its own, but it's Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically giving it that power to move. So when you look at فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاء, this also relates to سُقْنَاهُ. It comes with the same idea, the same way of that conjugation of that word. فَأَنزَلْنَا بِهِ الْمَاء. Here's that na right there with that أنزلنا, that na, that plural na, that plural pronoun, to let us know that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically released all this water, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that basically controls how things function, whether from up to down, or whether we're speaking about left and right and so forth. And therefore Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the one that controls even the water, and how these clouds would basically release it, because the clouds are a machine. They're a machine to basically run a certain process. They're to control a certain item. They're to release a certain item. They're basically to function as a way to drive certain particles of water and to release it. In other words, it's a machine. So when you look at that sahab and anzalna bihi al-ma, it's to let us know that everything right there functions as a machine, and it is subjugated to basically be at your service as a human being. And certainly all of that yashrabu biha ibadullah. Yashrabu biha ibadullah, basically that is to let the servants of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically have access to water, to let us see through that as Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power to let the wind blow, to let the clouds basically move, and to let the clouds release the water, and to let the clouds basically bring the water that will later bring about all the vegetation slash life. فأخرجنا به من كل الثمرات كذلك نخرج الموتى لعلكم تذكرون. And we talked about these two ahadith. Number one is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says فأخرجنا به من كل الثمرات, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically brings out, here's the na again, Why don't you look at this now again? فَأَخْرَجْنَا, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically lets all the different things of vegetation, or basically thamarat, all the different fruits, basically come out, blossom. But when you look at that now right there, that pronoun, na, in order to let us know that whether we're speaking about how things are driven, or whether from up to bottom, or whether we're speaking about from down to up. This is the opposite. This one is telling you that something that is controlled from up to down. Now we're going through a different basically type of motion. This is now telling you that this is something that grows from down to up. And what is that supposed to let us know? That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically controls every single dimension, up to bottom, left to right, right to left, down to up. All of that is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's see right there. When it says كَذَلِكَ نُخْرِجُ الْمَوْتَى لَعَلَّكُمْ تَذَكَّرُونَ, there is a hadith that's rather interesting right there. He said, let's see, أبي رزين العقيلي قال قلت يا رسول الله كيف يعيد الله الخلق وما آية ذلك في خلقه قال أما مررت بوادي قومك جدبا ثم مررت به يهتز خضرا قال نعم قال فتلك آية الله في خلقه. I thought it would be a good idea to look at this hadith and actually see just really quick. So right there, what is the story? So al-Bayhaqi and others, they basically narrated this hadith, that a man comes to the Prophet ﷺ, and his name is Abi Razin. Okay, al-Uqayli. And he came to the Prophet ﷺ and he said, O Prophet of Allah, how does the Lord Almighty resurrect the creation, basically? And what is the sign that I could see that in his creation? And the Prophet ﷺ responds, did you not pass by a city of your people, basically when it was infertile? And then you pass by it again and it was shaking with greenery. And he said, yes. He said, well, that's the sign of the Lord Almighty in his creation. So that's basically similar to what we were talking about in terms of the relationship between how the Lord Almighty would resurrect the people and the pattern or the paradigm that I could read in nature to actually see something similar to help me understand how that pattern will basically take place. So the Prophet ﷺ tells him, فَتِلْكَ آيَةُ اللَّهِ فِي خَلْقِهِ. It's the same way that you would come across a certain city, probably where it has no vegetation whatsoever, and then some rain comes over and you could see that it's live again with all that greenery. But of course, we needed to go back right there, and here he said that it was عند البيهقي in his book al-i'tiqad and in his book al-asma' wal-sifat, and you could see that he said Ahmad in his musnad, the hadith number that, and al-Hakim fil mustadrak, but that's not enough to actually let me know that whether this hadith is actually authentic or not. So that's why it would be very important to actually go back to some of those ahadith that relate to this one. So let's see right there in ad-Durar as-Saniyya, and basically did the easy job for us, and they said fi isnadihi ضعف ويحسنه بعضهم. Okay, what does that mean? In other words, in its chain of narration, there is a certain weakness, but some scholars actually said that it was in the state or the level of Hasan hadith. What is a Hasan hadith? A Hasan hadith is basically a hadith that is a type of an authentic hadith, but not necessarily fully authentic, because one of the narrators perhaps did not have the best, let's call it memory, in order to remember the exact wording of the hadith, but they are not accused in anything in relationship to their integrity, their religiosity, or perhaps maybe their relationship with the other narrators, but their problem was just in their ability or in their competence to remember and memorize the exact wording of the hadith. That was that area. Their competence to fully remember the exact wording of the hadith. So that's why some scholars did actually consider it as Hasan. But I want you to look at this one. So I thought it would be a good idea to go to this book right there. This is Abdullah Dwaish, did an outstanding job. And yeah, of course, we definitely would revere al-Albani, because hey, he was the one that considered it as isnadi dhaf, but at the same time he was fair enough to say, well, some scholars may disagree with me and consider it as a Hasan hadith. So right there you could see that in Takhrij al-Mishkah, who and what is al-Mishkah? So al-Mishkah did an outstanding job. The book is called Mishkat al-Masabih. Outstanding book, very helpful book. Even the name is so attractive, to be honest. What does Mishkat al-Masabih mean? Al-Mishkah is supposed to be, it's the niche, I guess. It's that lamp right there. So it's the light of the lamp. The light of the lamp, is it? Yeah, well, yeah. So that's basically that Mishkat al-Masabih. And you could see this book is actually in 2 volumes, and It-Tabrizi did an outstanding job in reviewing the hadith that are in Sunan Ibn Majah. Did an outstanding job there, but I still need more information. So he basically had said, well, in Takhrij al-Mishkah, Mishkat al-Masabih, which is the book that we were just seeing, he said that in its chain of narration, there's some weakness, and that some scholars actually had considered it as hadith that contains some, at least incompetence within one of the chain of narration, to not be at least in the best shape in giving us the exact wording. Let's see right there, and he wanted to comment on that, and he said قد جزم بأنه حسن في صحيح الجامع. But then, of course, you had other scholars in Sahih al-Jami', Suyuti basically had said, well, it is actually Hasan. And in fact, he insisted that it was a Hasan hadith. So I guess it would be something that we could use based on that. We could use as an authentic reference, or at least a credible reference to use in understanding this ayah and understanding the word, at least in the word كذلك. So we could use this hadith to help me understand the word كذلك, and we could, let's say, confidently say that the word كذلك is basically letting us know that the way that we would be resurrected is in the same type of pattern, that the earth would basically pour rain over, the clouds would pour the rain over the earth, and that basically lets the crops basically come back to life, and that we will be resurrected in the same way. And certainly we have Sahih Muslim. And in Sahih Muslim, we basically had seen this hadith when the Prophet ﷺ said, ثُمَّ يُرْسِلُ اللَّهُ أَوْ يُنْزِلُ اللَّهُ مَطَرًا كَأَنَّهُ الطَّلْ. That Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would basically release rain as if it like a pouring rain, and then people's bodies would basically plant. Wait, people's bodies would plant? Like what would, yes, they would grow from the seed, which basically would be the tailbone. That would be the seed, and then rain would pour, and people would grow like seeds. And then Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would order that people's souls would be returned back to them. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would say, وَقِفُوهُمْ إِنَّهُمْ مَسْئُولُونَ. Now that they are resurrected, now they have basically one position to go to, which is to go to their Lord Almighty for the time of accountability. وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. I want you to look at this one. So it's quite interesting, because After telling us that the water would pour and it would bring life to the city. But then it continued and said, and the good city would have its vegetation come out by the will of its Lord Almighty, and the poor or infertile land, its plants would only come out nakida. What is nakida? Nakida, is it crabby? Or is nakida to mean that it would be not good? Are we talking about weeds here? What are we actually talking about here? We're going to see that. كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون. This is how نصرف. What is نصرف? To dispense? To reveal? To show an expression? To التصريف? To, I guess, disseminate something? What does it mean? Well, okay, we're going to get there. And this is talking about al-ayat. What do you mean al-ayat? Like ayat as in verses or signs? What do you mean by al-ayat? لِقَوْمِ يَشْكُرُونَ, for people that are thankful. Thankful for what? For the rain that poured? Or, okay, let's see. So this is what we're going to do right now. We're going to study all this ayah in order to answer the questions that we basically had. So number one is that there's the literal interpretation. وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. So if we're talking about balad, we just laid out almost 7, 8 different meanings for the word balad, but most of the ayat, or at least the meanings, were around basically city, land, and certainly this would be within that context. This is talking about soil. This is talking about a city with that soil and how it would relate basically to the water that will pour over it. That's basically what it's relating to. So here when it says, وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ, this is talking about if literal sense. There's that literal sense that lets us know that a fertile land, when the water is poured over it, you would see that this fertile land would basically crop good types of vegetation. Okay. And the land that is not fertile, yes, it might get some plants here and there, but if it's not fertile, probably doesn't have the nutrients that are good enough to grow these plants, it would come out as nakida. Nakida, whether it's not of useful vegetation, so therefore it comes out as nakida, as one, not useful, or nakida could mean that it is disappointing, as disappointing. Okay. كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون, which basically right there, كذلك نخرج الموتى لعلكم تشكرون. So it comes with the same pattern. But what's the difference between this one and the one before it? Hold on, let me take this one out right there and actually zoom in order to see these two and try to connect the two together. Okay, so كذلك نخرج الموتى, as this is basically that if we are to describe this one, كذلك نخرج الموتى, meaning literally how the dead is resurrected, then in that situation, لعلكم تذكرون would basically let us know that there is something. What is it, تذكر? التذكر can mean to remember something. التذكر can mean to repeat something. التذكر could also mean to learn something. So when you look at لعلكم تذكرون, one, there is something to learn about that pattern in how rain basically is poured, and then learn that we as human beings, we will be resurrected in the same pattern, in the same idea, in the same concept, based on the same concept as vegetation would grow. So that's one thing to learn. Number two, to repeat. So does that mean كذلك نخرج الموتى لعلكم تذكرون? Does that mean repeating death? Well, this is talking about death being repeated and repeated and repeated on and on and on, and that even when people die, they basically are in patterns. Hey, you're going to die one day. Your children, they're going to die one day. The pattern is repeated on and on and on and on. And then this pattern will then start reversing the pattern, and everybody is basically going to be reversed in bringing them back to life and basically getting resurrected. So here's another pattern. And then the other meaning, لعلكم تذكرون, does that mean for us to remember death as a pattern that we will also are destined to one day die, and therefore recognize that your life is not going to be for any form or shape of infinity, and that one day you're going to die. So therefore prepare for that moment when your ending is basically going to happen, and then after that ending, that there's another pattern that you're going to be destined to basically come across, which is resurrection. So when you look at لعلكم تذكرون, whether something to learn, or whether we're speaking about a pattern, or whether we're speaking about something that for us to remember that there is a certain destiny that you're going to basically live up to, then that is also لعلكم تذكرون. So you're looking at تذكرون with all these different meanings. Let's see here. والبلد الطيب يخرج نباته بإذن ربه. In the city that basically is a طيب. Now, the other meaning, if we're going to say, okay, this is literally talking about laying out something that we would say nature, and that a good fertile city would bring about good crops. And an infertile city would not bring in good crops, nothing but basically weeds that are not of anything that would help us survive. Okay, or at least directly survive. Okay, now when you look at كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون, that's how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would let us see. What is the word نصرف? نصرف can mean to dispense something. What do you mean dispense? Like, for example, you put water probably in a container, and then you click the button or whatever it is, and then it dispenses and gets water out. That's the first meaning. Okay. Dispense or nusarrif could also mean to put things in different categories and different classifications. That's also another meaning for tasrif. Another meaning for tasrif is a certain pattern. Okay, a certain pattern. So when you look at كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون, so whether we're speaking about تصريف الآيات, if we're speaking about the word ayah to mean verses, then that would mean exactly like the water that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala sent it basically from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically sent it to Jibreel alayhi salam, and then the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam basically received these ayat, and then it was given to you. Okay. The other meaning, نصرف الآيات, that it's basically to give you a certain paradigm, a certain pattern for you to see. A certain paradigm for you to see in how, well, البلد الطيب يخرج نباته بإذن ربه, if we're speaking about verses for you to see, well, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting you know. Certainly, the verses of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala are sent down. If you have the fertile ground to receive these ayat, your heart is ready to receive it, to put it into action, to receive it, to understand it, to receive it, to fully put it into practice, then the result is going to be يخرج نباته بإذن ربه. That's the metaphorical result. That if you receive these ayat and your heart is fertile to receive it, then the result is going to be in your behavior. The result is going to be on your speech. The result is going to be in your identity, because the heart itself was ready to receive This information was ready to receive basically what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent down in the same pattern that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had sent the water down. And then this water, it on its own is not going to bring about life. But in order for it to bring about life, the land itself has to be fertile. In other words, the water itself is pure. The problem is not with the water, but the problem is with the earth and that ground that is receiving this water. And that's the same thing. The problem is not with the ayat. The ayat are nur, they contain the light. But if the person's heart was pacified thinking about other things, then they're going to find trouble in absorbing the ayat and absorbing the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, because the problem was not with the nur, but the problem was with the heart, or the problem was with the brain, or the problem was with the body, that it was basically pacified with something else. And therefore, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that, the ayat are there. And then the other meaning, كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ. If we're speaking about al-ayat, the first meaning is a literal meaning, like we said. So just letting us know that, hey, I want you to see the patterns in the world, the parables in the world around you in nature. And based on these patterns and parables that you see in nature, which Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala basically indicated, that's the same way that you also function. That's the same way that the messages also function. That's the same way that the revelation also functions in its heart, in your heart, and how you would absorb all of that. Now, لِقَوْمِ يَشْكُرُونَ, if we're speaking about a literal tasrif al-ayah, that would actually mean, well, are these people, if we're talking about a literal interpretation, are these people thankful for the vegetation that grew, for all the greenery, for all the different resources that these people had? Are they going to be thankful, or are they going to attribute whatever vegetation resources that they got, that they were the ones to cause it to happen, and not that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, أَأَنْتُمْ تَزْرَعُونَهُ أَمْ نَحْنُ الزَّارِعُونَ? Are you the ones that actually planted it, or is the actual plantation and the actual process of growing the plants, is that really something that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true one to be behind all this force, that you basically had thought that it was just an intrinsic power within the plant and not necessarily Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? So when you look at لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ, if this is the literal meaning, then in that situation, we would understand it that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is letting us know that every single force, every single power that you see around you is controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and therefore your relationship with it is to see the power of the Lord Almighty and be thankful for it. That's the first thing. The second thing, لِقَوْمِ يَشْكُرُونَ, if we are to say that this is to basically mean a metaphor, or to give us a hint for a metaphor, and understand that the same way that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would send the ayat, and then therefore your heart would be kind of like this earth, and that your heart, your mind, your body, and the way that they would absorb all of this is going to determine whether this person is going to recognize the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be thankful. So in other words, who's going to be thankful? The one that's going to be thankful for all that power that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala put within everything is basically the heart that is already thankful. If the heart is thankful, in other words, let's do it this way. How do I become the heart, or the mind, or the body that is fertile to receive the light or the ayat of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala? The first thing is that you have to be thankful. You have to recognize that all of this blessing that is around you did not come by your effort, but it actually came by the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's the start. Alhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen. That's how even Al-Fatiha started out with. All the praises due to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. It didn't even ask you to count anything. It just started out with telling you that in order to start your prayer, in order to start your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, start out by recognizing all the blessings that surround you from each and every single direction. That's how you start out your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in prayer. That's how you start out your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in faith. You start out by recognizing the blessings. And that's the same thing, recognizing the blessings, even your relationship, your social relationship. The first thing in recognizing your social relationship between you and your parents, you recognize all the contribution that they had invested in making you who you are. That's why the first thing that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had mentioned that when a person حتى إذا بلغ أشده وبلغ 40 سنة قال رب أوزعني أن أشكر نعمتك التي أنعمت علي وأن أعمل صالحا ترضى. The first thing, once they reach that level of maturity at age 40, when they had fully developed, the first thing that they would recognize is that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had basically given them the maturity, had given them the parents that had invested so much into making them who they are. That's the first thing. Same thing. Recognizing the blessings around you is the most important start, is the cornerstone to help you succeed. Because if you don't recognize these tools, then you're not going to be able to use them. The first thing that you have to recognize is basically all those tools, or basically all those tools that surround you. And a lot of these tools are basically your parents. A lot of these tools are basically the blessings to have a family, to recognize that they made things basically possible for you to achieve and to be there and to be able to do what you want to do. So when you're looking at whether recognizing parents or recognizing Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it actually starts لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ. If the person is struggling in opening their hearts, in connecting with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we're going to say the first thing I want you to recognize is all the blessings that surround you from each and every single corner. So when you look at كَذَلِكَ نُصَرِّفُ الْآيَاتِ لِقَوْمٍ يَشْكُرُونَ, it's giving us that inference that in order to help you process, whether we're speaking about processing these ideas, or that ideas that are basically in the Quran, or whether we're speaking about processing the ideas, the patterns that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had put in nature, the open book and the written book. Open book is basically everything in nature. Whether we're speaking about your brain processing the information, or whether we're speaking about your body, let's say, transferring this information into action, making it into identity. How do I make this information of Tawheed into an identity that on their deathbed, they're just going to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un. Alhamdulillah Rabbil Alameen. Have husn al-dhan. Now that doesn't happen within a day, because ilm is two kinds. There's the ilm in understanding, and there's the ilm when it basically comes with training. It basically comes with training. Just like there's the ilm, you take certain classes and you study about chemistry, biology, physics, whatever it is, you study the theoretical piece of it. But then there's the other type of ilm that it's hands-on. How you put those hands on and how you train. That's the other type of ilm. And that's the same thing when it comes to Islam. He'll tell you basically the theory of it, but the theory of it is not enough. There's the hands-on, that practice. If your car broke down, are you going to start right there just saying all these bad words? Or are you going to say, Inna lillahi wa inna ilayhi raji'un? Your children, they basically chose the wrong thing. Are you going to make dua for them, or what are you going to do? Your husband, you and him, you went into disagreement. Are you going to say right there, probably going to make that decision that Islam did not prescribe for you as the right way to handle your disagreement? Or are you going to say, you know what? I know that that's what Islam says, but I have my own way. Well, then you're going to find yourself as dispensing things differently. That's the same way. And Islam tells you, well, listen, I want you to find these correlations between the way you absorb the information and the way you dispense and the way you transfer this information into an action, into an identity, whether at the time of dilemma, crisis, or time of sorrow, or whether we're speaking at a time of happiness. How are you going to celebrate your wedding? How are you going to celebrate a happy moment? How are you going to celebrate? How are you going to, I guess, give yourself the therapy to overcome a sad moment? How are you going to process both sad, happy, challenge, and success? How are you going to celebrate those? Or how are you going to react? How is that tasrif going to happen? How does that dispense? How does that transfer? How do you classify all that piece of information to then present itself in different ways? So now you see the patterns. كذلك نصرف الآيات لقوم يشكرون. But although this was probably a little off if we were to compare it with what al-Qurtubi would want to say. So let's see what al-Qurtubi wanted to say and actually go to a further, deeper meaning based on what al-Qurtubi wanted to go to. And let's see. And he said, well, البلد الطيب. Hold on, let me just erase all of this so we can make sure that we're seeing those words together. Okay, so let's see. And he was saying البلد الطيب. He said, what is البلد الطيب? He says البلد الطيب is actually speaking about a fertile soil. In the contrast to it, is basically البلد الخبيث. الطيب means something that is good. Al-khabith is anything that is not good, whether we're speaking about impure or whether we're speaking about something that is not healthy, or whether we're speaking about something that is disgusting, or whether something that is evil. That's khabith. Al-tayyib, whether we're speaking about something that is good, something sweet, something that is um, healthy. Okay, all of that would be tayyib. So if we're talking about التربة الطيبة, if we're talking about literally البلد الطيب to actually mean fertile soil, we're speaking about the soil that doesn't contain perhaps maybe rocks or probably thorns or weed and all of that, but it's basically right there to basically be something that is containing all the nutrients that are necessary in order to grow crops within it. Okay, let's see. The other scholars actually said, well, this is more of, look at the word tashbih, metaphorical. This is metaphorical, figurative, and said, well, this is basically giving us a comparison between somebody that is intelligent to understand things fast. In other words, now this is talking about one. So I put them in numbers right there. Number one, to basically give a metaphorical description, or at least at what the word al-balad al-tayyib is really referring to, and said that this is metaphorical to mean somebody that is fast in understanding and processing information. And a person that is slow in processing information is basically khabr. Okay. Is this talking about like in somebody's intelligence? Like somebody that is smart and intelligent and somebody that is probably not intelligent? So if, let's say, I don't know, my IQ is at this level and somebody else's IQ at a higher level, is this what it's referring to? No, because we're not necessarily talking about people's IQs here to mean sari' al-fahm. Somebody can have a high IQ, all right, and probably but a low insight. Okay, what's the difference between sight and insight? Sight can be a person that is so smart, when it comes to, understanding math or probably understanding the patterns around you and all of that. They can be really smart in figuring out the algorithms and things. Insight is a person that sees through the light of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They may be blind, but they have deep insight that they see through the lens of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that this lens of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala gave them wisdoms to find that other people may not have necessarily figured out, may not have necessarily sensed. Okay. Let's see, the other metaphorical explanation, they said, well, this is giving us as an example to the heart. So the heart that is fertile would basically contain and absorb all the reminder. They would absorb all the reminder. They're reminded, her husband tells her, have taqwa. This is not what Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked you to do, or something like that. And at that moment, she's just, all of a sudden, when she was told to have taqwa, or when her husband, when the man was told to have taqwa, whether it's a man or a woman, all right, then they take a moment to just remember that, I just got carried away with my anger? Did I just get carried away with my own personal interest and just forget the legislation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me, and the principles that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me to abide by? Did I put my personal interest on top of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's principles? Or what did I live based on? So that is that heart that I'm willing to compromise and give up on certain interests of mine because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me to live based on a certain principle or a certain value. I'm going to give up on my personal interest here because Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala asked me to be patient right there, and I'm going to move on this way. Okay, let's see right there. And there is قلب فاسق ينبو عن ذلك. The heart of a fasiq. What is the heart of a fasiq? The heart of a fasiq. The heart of a fasiq is basically the heart of a person that is distant from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And then therefore, whenever they're reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, their hearts are not absorbing, their hearts are not fully connected, and they just don't even get enlightened even when they're reminded of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So what happens in that situation? They don't take the words of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the words that they will be reminded of in order to correct their behavior, to correct the choices that they would be making. But they would just consider it as nothing but white noise. And that's qalb al-fasiq. نسأل الله العفو والعافية. Let's see. The other interpretation, they said, well, that's exactly like a believer, that they would invest in good behavior. So what does that mean? So a believer would invest in whatever they invested in, whether it's a donation that they had given, or probably perhaps a good deed and compromise, or whatever. They basically had invested it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and they're not looking for anything in return in this dunya. So they're not waiting for probably, the husband, hey, you didn't tell me thank you. She'd be like, well, I didn't do it for him to thank me for it. Although, yes, that would be nice to say thank you and to, show me that you appreciate, because the Prophet ﷺ said that if you're not thankful to people, then you're not going to be thankful to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Yes, indeed. Saying Jazakallah khairan, being thankful, showing appreciation is definitely a very important act of showing that the appreciation for whatever you had invested, or whatever I had invested in, etc. But at the same time, even all that appreciation is not going to probably be as equivalent to the amount of investment that you probably put in. So in that situation, for a mu'min, even if they do not get anything in return, and to compensate to the amount of probably effort equivalent to the effort that they had invested in. They recognize that what they are looking for is a reward from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's al-balad al-tayyib. What do they want? Well, they're seeking that reward or that appreciation in return by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala al-Hamid. So what are they seeking? Well, they're seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's reward, not people's reward. Versus al-munafiq, which is the hypocrite, they would basically غير محتسب. They basically are waiting for something in return. And if they don't get anything in return, that's when they'll probably retaliate in ways to either brag about what they had done. Remember that day? And yeah, if it wasn't for me, you would not have gotten the papers. And if it wasn't for me, you would have probably were homeless and who knows what. And if it wasn't for me, you would have never gotten your education. If it wasn't for me, you would have never gotten a job. And if it wasn't, etc. The list goes on and on to basically brag about it. And that's why Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. And do not void all the investment, all the sadaqah. Sadaqah is not just a money donation, but a sadaqah can be a smile. A sadaqah can be service. A sadaqah can be anything that you probably had put in effort to happen. That's a sadaqah. And Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says, وَلَا تُبْطِلُوا صَدَقَاتِكُمْ بِالْمَنِّ وَالْأَذَى. That's al-man. Person just bragging about it to let the other person feel that if it wasn't for me doing it for you, you would have probably been in a place of pity. And that it was me that helped you get out of the situation that you're in. I was the one to do this and this for you. I. And not that, at the end, is that for a mu'min, they don't void the good deeds by man or adha. Al-adha is basically harm. How do you harm the person? Yeah, I did this for you, so therefore you'll always owe it to me. And no matter what you did, you'll never be able to pay it back. That's adha. No matter what they did. Oh, yeah, they'll always never be able to pay it back, and they'll always owe it to that person. That's a munafiq that's always dealing with people that, yeah, I'm going to help you, but I want you to remember that I helped you and that you will always be owing it to me. That's not doing it for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's doing it for the sake of enslaving others. That's doing it for the sake of self-centricity. The Prophet ﷺ had also mentioned, let's look at this hadith. Although it's I guess it's a different way of looking at it. Let's see. The Prophet ﷺ said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَوْ يَعْلَمُ أَحَدُهُمْ أَنَّهُ يَجِدُ عَظْمًا سَمِينًا أَوْ مِرْمَاتَيْنِ حَسَنَتَيْنِ لَشَهِدَ الْعِشَاء. When did he say that? He said, by the one that has my soul in his hands, if one of them would know that they would, if they were to come to the masjid, that they would find basically bones that had some meat in it, or probably pieces of leftovers, that they would have actually come to Isha. So what does that mean? So what would that mean? That would basically mean the Prophet ﷺ, the context of this hadith is that the Prophet ﷺ was letting us know that this is the story of the hadith, that some people would only come to the masjid only if they were going to find some food or reward, or probably something to, even if it's, hey, they're passing out cookies, that would be the only reason why they would come to the masjid. And others, no, they're actually seeking Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, regardless of food being passed out, or regardless of probably some reward. That's not what they're seeking. What they're seeking is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. That's a mu'min. And this is the story. This is the story of that hadith when the Prophet ﷺ basically said, وَالَّذِي نَفْسِي بِيَدِهِ لَقَدْ هَمَمْتُ أَنْ آمُرَ بِحَطَبٍ فيحطب ثم آمر بالصلاة فيؤذن لها ثم آمر رجلا فيؤم الناس ثم أخالف إلى رجال فأحرق عليهم بيوتهم والذي نفسي بيده لو يعلم أحدهم أنه يجد عظما سمينا أو مرماتين حسنتين لشهد العشاء. And in another رواية عرقا سمينا, or actually isn't it عرقا سمينا? Because the Sayyidah Aisha in the hadith that the Prophet ﷺ used to, she said كنت أتعرق العرق. What is أتعرق العرق? She would munch on the bones, and the Prophet ﷺ would munch the bones after her. The bones like that contained some pieces of meat. Okay, let's see. So this hadith, you could say that it is actually a hadith that is Sahih, because you can find in Sahih Muslim and Sahih al-Bukhari basically having this hadith. So what is the story? That the Prophet ﷺ had said, by the one that has my soul in his hands, I had attempted to basically order to get logs, and then for those that didn't come to pray, that he would order men to burn down their homes in order to bring them over to the masjid, basically. And that some of them would only come if they had known that there was probably some meat left behind, and that they would only come for that. What is that supposed to mean? So that's basically to let us know that a true believer is not looking for a reward in this dunya, but a true believer would basically look for a reward for the akhirah. So they would go to the masjid, whether they were told by their parents that they were going to play a game or get a reward or whatever it is, or not. To them, it doesn't matter. Their reward is Jannah. That's what they're seeking. They're seeking the reward of Jannah. They're seeking the reward to make it past Sirat and make it to Jannah. That's what they're looking for, and instill it within their hearts. Certainly, when they're young, in order to put in this discipline, you probably want to encourage them by giving them some form of perhaps a reward. But by the age of puberty, they should have then established a certain level of maturity to understand that an investment in good action does not always have to come with a reward or a pay, and that the investment is for the akhirah, and that's the true reward. So by the age of puberty, they should have gone past the discipline of wanting to seek a reward in this dunya and actually seek the reward of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Let's look at this one, nakida. So how do we understand this one? Let's look at this one. We know that the word nakad, okay, can mean crabby, can mean of something that is not useful, which basically relates with the word khabutha. Okay, if something is not useful, if something is impure, if something is basically of harmful, okay, then that's something that is khabith. And لا يخرج إلا نكدا, in other words, the implication, if it is not useful, then the implication is that it is basically bringing me harm. If something is impure, then the implication is basically getting me something that is contaminated. If something is khabutha, to mean that it is evil, then it is harmful. That would be basically the result. Okay, so when you look at that one, you could see, at least look at this ayah, you could see that there are different qira'at. So nakida or nakada Or let's see the other qira'at that I know that he mentioned it here. Okay, nakada and nakda. Those are different qira'at. Different qira'at nakida, nakda, and nakada. Okay. Do they mean the same thing? Well, certainly they pretty much mean the same thing. It's just different accents. And here, nakida, it's ironic that he actually said qila nakida, and here nakida. Okay, so who's in nakida anyways? So it's basically the person or something that is incapable of giving good. And he said, وَهَذَا تَمْثِيلٌ. What is tamthil? Meaning it's a parable. When it said if something is incapable of giving good, that means it is basically in itself intrinsically harmful in itself. And that's really bad. I would like to say one thing, that within homes, the person that is khabith, a person that is constantly complaining about everything, they're constantly complaining about everything. Today they would call them toxic. This is the modern word for it. They call them toxic. And that's basically another word. Toxic is probably the modern translation for the word khabith or nakida. Okay, a person that is toxic, a person that, they're just right there, wherever they may be, they're always looking at things with a negative eye, not to bring good, but to basically cause everyone or everything to basically feel either bad about themselves or they're incapable of doing what is right. And that's basically that al-khabith. There are certain people that they just want to just continuously complain about everything. That's why the Prophet ﷺ actually said in the hadith about why many women would go to hellfire. And he said, يُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ وَتَكْفُرْنَ الْعَشِيرَ. What is تُكْثِرْنَ اللَّعْنَ? Constantly damning things and expecting that it's other people's responsibility to basically be there for you. So if, let's say, you probably were not successful in life, oh, it's my parents' fault. They were toxic. They were this. And consider that it's your parents' fault. Once you get married, oh, it's your husband's fault. He basically made your life just so miserable. If it's at school, your teachers are just so horrible at teaching. If it's probably your job, your coworkers are just not doing their job. And everywhere they go, it's everybody's fault and it's never your fault. That's a person that is khabith. All right. So that's why the Prophet ﷺ had basically let us know that these people, just like whether it's a woman, that tukthirna al-la'n wa takfurna al-ashir. If it's a woman, or even if it's a man, can a man actually be like that? Yeah, absolutely. A man can be like that. So why did the Prophet ﷺ talk about women at that moment? Well, that's because he was giving the maw'idha to women. He was giving the reminder to women, and it was women. So the story goes as follows. Bilal ibn Rabah is carrying something like think of it as, a cloth. And of course, they didn't have containers, but that was the container. That was the cloth. And he would just lay it out. And these women would take off their jewelry and they would just throw it inside this cloth in order to basically set it for donations. Okay. So that was Bilal ibn Rabah seeing all of this. And then the Prophet ﷺ was reminding them on the day of Eid to make those donations. And the donation was to help remove the contaminants within their hearts. Okay, what contaminants? So that's when the Prophet ﷺ said, well, I had seen many women in hellfire, basically. Is that just a description of many women, basically, of dunya not make it to Jannah? Or is that saying, well, many women were in hellfire, and therefore to encourage these women, he was telling them, well, I don't want you to be there, in order to remove such contamination within your hearts, within your brain, when you say contaminants within the heart is different than saying a contaminant within the brain. A contaminant within the brain, it sees the world with a negative khabith with a negative toxic lens. If it's a khabith heart, it basically would see everything with the heart as nothing but everything's going wrong with that negativity, basically passing it out everything. If it's behavior, then they're just going to be just cruel to everybody, criticizing everybody, just spreading, what they would say, negative energy. Even though, yes, we don't believe in that negative energy in that form, but I mean, negative energy meaning negative behavior. Okay, I don't mean as in shamanism. Okay, so والذي خبث لا يخرج إلا نكدا. We're speaking about right there that naked or naked. Okay, naked. Okay, all of that is basically right there to let us know that it's the heart. If a person is seeing the world with the lens of طيب, then the behavior is going to speak in طيب. If they're seeing the world through the lens of Quran and Sunnah, their behavior or their heart would process that through the lens of Quran and Sunnah, and their body and their behavior would basically process that in khawf and tama. Khawf, their fear of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically to put them to do the right behavior. And their tama, that I'm not waiting for people to give me anything in return. I would invest in good, not myself. I mean, inshallah, Rabbil Alamin would make me amongst those, but people, we would invest in good, basically, for waiting for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to give us the reward for it in return. Okay, so that's al-balad al-tayyib, the heart that is tayyib. Okay, and يخرج نباته بإذن ربه, that's whether we're speaking about behavior or whether we're speaking about words or whether we're speaking about different reactions that you might display. All of that is basically going to be a result of how you processed your relationship with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And certainly كذلك نصرف الآيات, right there, where are we talking about الآيات to mean verses, or is this talking about the different evidences in the open book? Open book, what do you mean open book? Where's open book is to basically refer to the different things that you would see in nature, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala created in nature that reflects Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's magnificence. So those would be ad-dilalat, the different signs, the different paradigms, the different things that would basically help you see the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the power of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And that's basically how Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala would give you two forms of tasrif al-ayat. Give you two forms of tasrif al-ayat. The first form is basically through the open book, which is nature. The second form is the revelation, which is the written book or the recited book. The revelation through ayat to help you put and connect these two pieces together. The open book and the written book, or at least the revealed book. And that's basically what you would find as in Revelation, and that it contains all the things that people need. So all you need in order to be a person that is thankful, to be a person that is not living in this type of distress. Another word perhaps that we can see as a word that is probably in contrast, لقوم يشكرون, is probably people that are living in depression. People that are living in depression, they see everything as, oh, it's going into a negative direction. It's not coming in as a positive way of seeing things. So what is I mean, this isn't to say every single person that goes through depression is going through that, but I'm saying one of the wrongly classified group of people that may actually have spiritual or heart, let's call it illness, and they require spiritual or they require religious healing, and probably not medication and antidepressants and all of that. Part of those are wrongly classified as going through and needing these medications But some of them, all they needed was وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. All they needed was really a moment to understand their tawheed, to look at the magnificence of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, to live at al-tama' and hope in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and to see that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's mercy, that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power basically goes around you and above you and up from beneath you and in each and every single direction without you realizing. Then therefore you connect with the hope of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you connect to the mercy of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and those would be the people to benefit from all of this. The only ones to benefit from all of this, that revelation and all the different things that surround them, are the people to recognize it. Recognize what? Recognize from the open book Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala's power, and recognize through the revelation that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala is the true master behind all of this. So therefore, you recognize that you put your hope, you put your faith, you put your khawf and your tama', and you put all your faith in Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, for He is Tabarakallahu Rabbul Alameen, and He is Qareebun min al-Muhsineen, and He is the one that is basically yukhrijul mauta. So therefore, He is the one that we would live in His rahmah, that basically surrounds us everywhere. So that's that relationship that a mu'min would basically surround themselves with Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. They would recognize that all the barakah and all the good comes from Rabbil Alameen. All the rahmah is near the muhsineen, and all that rahmah is bushram bayna yaday rahmatah. Everything's controlled by Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that all that power is basically circulating us in each and every single direction. And all we need to do is open up our eyes, open up our ears, open up our hearts, and basically reflect upon it and put it into practice. And that's how we become from the qawm that yashkurun. They will be thankful, they will live happy, they will live content. When you are shakir, you are content. When you are thankful, you are basically using these resources, investing in these resources, and heading towards success in this dunya and in akhirah. But if you cannot see the ni'am, then certainly you will not use them. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala bless us with His rahmah, make us amongst those al-muhsineen, and make us from those that would realize always Tabarakallahu Rabbul Alameen, and make us from those that would be useful to themselves, useful to others, and would always be having that heart as وَالْبَلَدُ الطَّيِّبُ يَخْرُجُ نَبَاتُهُ بِإِذْنِ رَبِّهِ. This is it. سبحانك اللهم وبحمدك نستغفرك ونتوب إليك نشهد أن لا إله إلا أنت. If there are any questions, my friends, go ahead. I truly, truly, truly miss all of you. And I know that, it's been a while, but I'm so happy